So this story is gonna have one of the most amazing endings ever, so make sure you guys stick around for that. But I kind of forgot that DC was doing DCeased. Not gonna lie, I'm a little bit ashamed. I gotta get caught up, you know what I mean? So here's the thing, picking back up with this, right? We come off issues 1 and 2. Make sure you guys check the playlist down in the description so you can get caught up. We're literally 2 issues in, so we're just kind of picking up with issues 3 and 4 in this video, so you don't have a whole lot of catching up to do. But what this does is this initially focuses on a guy by the name of Adam Strange. Now, Adam Strange is a cool character, and he's a guy that you don't really see a whole lot of stories being done with, but he's got one of the most interesting aspects to any character in DC Comics. So check this out. The idea behind Adam Strange, and he's an old Julia Schwartz character from back in the 1950s. The idea behind Adam Strange is that on the planet Rann, right, you basically had the Emperor who did what's the equivalent of like shining a flashlight from half a mile away in the middle of the desert, right? Like you'd see that light and just be like, what's that, right? And you would go and see what it was. So the idea behind the people of Rann is they literally sent a Zeta beam down to Earth in the hopes that like people on Earth would be like, what in the world is this? They would trace it back to its source and they would come into contact with an extraterrestrial race, right? Expand the possibilities of humanity. What ended up happening is the Zeta beam was mutated through cosmic radiation. So when it hit Adam Strange, it basically gave him powers, and then it teleported him to the planet of Rann, where he basically ended up falling in love with this chick named Alana, right? He's actually got a child, right? So they basically have a kid together. But the idea behind the Zeta beam is that there is no real controlling it, right? Like Adam Strange will be teleported to Rann, and then he'll be there for a little while, then the Zeta beam will randomly teleport him back. There's no way of knowing when that's going to happen. So the idea behind his character is that he would literally just run around Earth trying to find where the new Zeta beam was going to arrive, and then ride the beam back to Rann, where he would offer or really kind of operate as a protector of the planet while also trying to be with his love interest. It was cool, right? It was really, really cool. DC never really knew what to do with him, but the story behind him was great. And that's literally what happens here, right? Rann is one of the worlds that is under attack at the hands of basically the Undead Armada, right? If you guys remember everything we covered in the first 2 issues of War of the Undead Gods, that Darkseid has now re-emerged infected with the anti-life equation, right? Basically, this kind of anti-life version of like a zombie virus. Not only that, Darkseid's also a Yellow Lantern now, right? So it's a immensely powerful Darkseid, more so than he normally is. And this literally allowed all these zombies that have basically been moving around the universe and infecting worlds to coalesce under the power of Darkseid and then start moving forward with an intention, right? To literally start conquering world after world after world. And so where Adam Strange is teleported away, his wife and his kid are basically left there to fend for themselves as best they can, along with whatever survivors are there. Now, it's not something that takes them by surprise. Again, Alana's well familiar with this, his kid's well familiar with this, right? They're aware, it's just how these things go. And ironically enough, one of the downside of his character is that these things, the Zeta beam would always activate at the most inconvenient time, right? So literally, this is the worst time for the beam to activate, but when it does, it teleports him back down to Earth and he arrives in Gotham City 2 months before a cure is found for the anti-life virus. And so what ends up happening is that as he's making his way through Gotham, he sees Wonder Woman while he's trying to understand what had happened here. Once he sees Wonder Woman, of course, she was infected. This is, of course, before she died, but she was infected. She immediately attacks Adam Strange and turns Adam Strange into one of the zombies. So what ends up happening is about 2 weeks later, Adam Strange is teleported back to Rann using a Zeta beam, and when he arrives, he's infected and then attacks his family. So it's just the craziest thing, right? It's absolutely bonkers. Now, a few days after that, we basically transition over to the Rylex system with one of the coolest moments, right? One of the absolute best moments in this. It's not the crazy ending that I was telling you about, but it is one of the coolest moments, right? So basically here in this bar, and when you guys know, when we're talking about a bar out in space in DC Comics, you know who we're talking about. We're talking about the main man, Lobo himself. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Now, anybody out there who's not familiar with Lobo, this guy was designed back in the day to be like an over-the-top version of Wolverine from Marvel Comics that basically was on par with the power of Superman. Lobo's a hoss, right? This guy is amazing. But the thing about this is this guy kind of shows up out of nowhere and says, like, I'm looking for somebody noble who can basically, you know, help fend the universe against whatever threat is out there, right? This massive threat that's kind of running around. We're looking for somebody to help us. Is anybody down, right? Is anybody, you know, interested in this? Now, of course, Lobo's like, what does it pay? And this guy's like, I am looking for someone noble. You clearly do not fit that description. Now, the problem here is everybody hears this said, and it's just kind of like, bruh, that ain't what you want to say to a man like Lobo. Right? But the crazy thing about this is before Lobo can help this guy finish with all his living, we end up having a Thanagarian warship that arrives onto the scene. And as this warship emerges, of course, all these Thanagarians who had basically been taken over by the anti-life virus, basically the race where like Hawkman and Hawkgirl come from, that they literally start like pouring into the entirety of the bar and even the planet as a whole and start attacking everybody. Now, the funny thing about this is one of these guys attacks Lobo and they scratch him. Now, under normal circumstances, a person would change. Lobo does not, because Lobo has an insane healing factor. He can heal from pretty much anything. In fact, Lobo's been cut into pieces and then just reconstituted himself. Again, his level of just strength and durability and healing factor is designed to be ridiculously over the top and comical. In this story, it pays off because this guy's like, you do not turn. And Lobo's like, oh, I can turn, right? I can keep turning and turning until your head comes off your shoulders, and like rips his head off. And he's like, nobody starts killing Lobo's bartenders without Lobo doing anything about it. So Lobo literally shows up here and annihilates the entirety of not only the Thanagarian warship, but most of the Thanagarians themselves. And that's where this guy's like, okay, so like, I guess you are the warrior I was looking for, right? A guy who's really capable. I mean, you got problems, right? But we could use you, right? I mean, you know, we can make it work. You know what I mean? We can make it work, right? So literally, what we do here is we switch over to Themyscira. Now again, Themyscira is throwing a funeral for Wonder Woman. Now it's one of those things that's really cool here because of course Diana was turned by the virus and then literally was instrumental in slaughtering I don't know how many people on Earth. But the thing about this is before all of that, she was Diana, right? Like the princess of Themyscira, Wonder Woman, and Amazon. So it's one of those things where just because she was turned by a virus and led to the wholesale slaughter of pretty much all of humanity, doesn't make her a bad guy, right? We all make mistakes. Right? We all make mistakes. We all do things that we don't mean to do. And sometimes we say things we don't mean to say. But in all seriousness, right? Wonder Woman has always been an exceedingly honorable member of the superhero community. And because of that, her people on Themyscira, she's a sister to them. So it's less that Wonder Woman went on this rampage as just some kind of a villain, and more that she was a victim of a circumstance that she couldn't control. And so with this funeral being held for her, what you end up having is, of course, Artemis and Oliver Queen. Now, Artemis, she's a little more interesting. This is really, I would say, Tom Taylor, building on what's been happening with DC Comics over the last few years as far as Artemis goes, that the idea behind her character is that she was an Amazon that ultimately ended up making her way out into the larger superhero community, not really in an identical way to Wonder Woman. And of course, she fought alongside Red Hood in The Outlaws, which was an amazing comic in DC Rebirth. Oh my God, Red Hood? Oh, you guys remember that? Red Hood in The Outlaws from DC Rebirth? Dude, that story was amazing. DC's absolutely jumped the shark in recent years, but back when DC Rebirth was, dude, everything was the best thing coming out of DC Rebirth. I'm just saying, like, the stories were absolutely amazing. But of course, they basically fire off the arrows to, you know, as kind of a funeral pyre for Wonder Woman, and that's when Ares, the god of war, shows up. Now, under normal circumstances, when Ares shows up, it's because he's looking to start some stuff, right? Kind of stir that pot a little bit, get conflict brewing by feeding off the conflicts of people, inciting them into war with each other, different things like that. But the thing about this is that with his arrival, the Themyscirians absolutely like immediately turn on him, right? The Amazons like turn on this guy and they're like, you're not welcome here. You don't need to be here. But of course he tells them like, I am not here to be your enemy. I'm not here to incite conflict or to incite war. And yes, myself and Wonder Woman were massive enemies over the years, but one, I'm here to pay my respects to an honorable warrior. And two, I basically am enlisting you guys in a gigantic conflict that's going on. I will show you what's happening. And so what he does is he brings all of them to the Hall of the Gods. And of course, he basically ends up giving the arrow of Apollo to Oliver Queen, right? To Green Arrow, which is cool, right? Because he basically gets the bow of a god. Now, of course, he says the weight feels a little off. Can I tweak it? And the response of Ares is just like, can you tweak the golden bow of Apollo? A bow that hunted the great beasts of Carcoom, whatever, that slew the Leviathan lion. And Oliver's like, yeah, man, it's a little top heavy. And he's like, fine, you can tweak it. So one of the things I love about Tom Taylor writing is he kind of has the ability to sort of inject humor with characters that you wouldn't normally expect to be humorous. Ares is never really a humorous guy, right? He's never really the guy where like he jokes and, and makes little comments and stuff, but it's more the context of the situation that makes the whole thing funny. But the reality is that when they ask Ares, what is it that you want from us, right? Like, why did you bring us here? And so what Ares says is there's a war coming, right? Now, of course, Cassie Sandsmark, who was at one point Wonder Woman, literally says, like, we just had a war. Now you're here. Billions died before this. And this is where things get crazy, because what Ares says is that was no war. There was no struggle. There was only defeat. I am not the god of slaughter. And that's an important distinction to understand here, right? When you look at the entirety of DCeased, it is kind of easy to look at that and say, it's a war of the survivors versus the ones who were infected. But that's not how it played out. Remember back in like the first DC story, what happened? People got infected and the world ended. Like over the course of the first, like the original story arc, the original DC story arc, that happened, if I remember, over the course of like a few days, like maybe a week or two, but the world collapsed almost immediately. It was literally just people being infected and the superheroes fleeing for their lives because the infection had spread so incredibly fast, really thanks to the Flash who'd been infected, that there was nothing anybody could do, right? So the superheroes were just trying to save who they could, where they could, and got out as fast as they can, right? There was no war. It was just people fleeing for their lives. And so that's literally what he's saying now. And of course, what is kind of nuts is he says that it's not just a war that's coming, but it's a war that cannot be won. The final war, right? It will be glorious, but ultimately futile. I will stay to watch the end, but every race in the universe will die. And so when the question's asked, how can you be so certain of our failure? And he says, because all of this has happened before. And that's what's so cool about this, right? It's literally Battlestar Galactica. All of this has happened before, and all of it will happen again. He says, this is how the entire universe was infected. And so where Oliver asks the question, like Ares presents a book to him, right? And says, this is how things unfolded before. The response of Oliver Queen is the most logical one, where he's like, okay, so if what you're holding is a record book, right? A book that says like, this is how things transpired before, somebody had to have survived to tell the tale, which means if there was one survivor, there was more than one survivor, otherwise every race would have just died out for no other reason than the fact that they can't procreate anymore, right? So that means if there were survivors, then the question has to be asked, how did we survive this last time? And the response of Ares is, no one did. This is a record from a universe that was lost, right? A universe that was completely and totally lost. And so at that moment, you basically have Dinah, who's basically the Green Canary, right? She got a Green Lantern ring, that she's contacted by the Guardians of the Universe who were just like, we're calling every single Green Lantern across the universe back to Oa. We're forming a staging ground, right? We're gonna use Oa as a battleground to figure out how we can defeat all these different undead folks who are out there. And that's when Ares says, it begins, right? And so literally this goes out to everyone out there, right? Kyle Rayner, John Stewart, like Kilowog, the whole 9 yards. Guy Gardner, who's out there, every single Green Lantern. Not only that, the response of the Guardians on Oa is like, bring everybody who is an ally, everybody who's alive, any able-bodied man and woman who can fight, that has any measure of power, bring them to Oa, right? Every superpowered being in the universe is coming here if we can find some way to stage, keep this conflict from spreading beyond what it already is. But the funny thing here is kind of jumping back to Ares, the response of Oliver Queen is, well, things are different now. When the whole event first kicked off, we had no idea what was going on, but now we have a cure. We have the ability to cure everybody. Like Oliver's stance is like, we've basically already won. The only issue that we have now is how do we get a cure to everybody out there in order to turn them back to normal? And the response of Ares is, you're not fighting an equation, right? And that's when like Cassie chimes in and says, yeah, but Darkseid said, and Ares' response is, Darkseid is a new god. He's a child, right? A powerful pawn for something much larger. He had no idea what he was doing when he merged the anti-life equation with death. The gaze that's been turned towards us, that's the real threat. He says, this is no equation. This is older than numbers, older than the gods. The universe will die. And he says, Erebos is here, right? So Erebos is this being that's basically behind all of this, right? This is the force that was unleashed. Now, from here, we switch over to one of the coolest parts of the story, right? One of the coolest parts of this, that what ends up happening here is Alfred initially has these visions where, if you recall, in the first DC story, he was forced to kill Batman and Tim Drake and Dick Grayson. He was forced to kill these guys. So the only person that was really left here was basically Damian Wayne. Now, if I recall correctly, I don't remember off the top of my head, I want to say that Red Hood survived, but I can't remember. I know he was part of one of the tie-in stories, so if you guys recall down in the comments section, let me know. I could look it up, but like I'm in the middle of recording this right now, so you know, I'm a single task person. I don't do very well when it comes to multitasking. But of course, all of these visions and everything kind of wake Alfred up out of his sleep, and he's basically there accompanied by Leslie Tompkins. Now, Leslie Tompkins had for the longest time been an ally of Batman. She was kind of comparable to Night Nurse from Marvel Comics. She was much older than that, but or at least had been around longer than that. But the idea behind Leslie is she was the one that would tend to the wounds of Batman if he needed it, or she would help other members of the superhero community depending on the circumstance. She was a very significant character in the Batman mythos. Over the years, she lost that level of importance in DC Comics, and it's just kind of been relegated to a background character. So one of the cool things about Tom Taylor's run is that he has sort of bolstered her presence back up to being a significant member of the Bat family, even if it's only here to be a love interest and somebody to comfort Alfred. But the thing about this is that when Damian and Jonathan tell Alfred they have to leave, that they have to go join the Guardians of the Galaxy, the Guardians of the Universe, in order to deal with this massive threat of the Undead Armada, that initially Alfred begs Damian not to go, right? He's like, please don't leave. I already lost your father. I already lost what were basically my sons. I don't want to lose another son again. But the reality of Damian, and this really shows how much he's changed since like the initial outbreak happened and how he's really become a hero, that stepping into this role, his response to Alfred is, this is much bigger than me, right? It's much bigger than you. This is literally the fate of the universe. And if I can die in order to save the universe, then it's a death worth having. I don't want to. I'm not going into this with the expectation that I die, but if I do, it will be for a great cause. And so the response of Alfred, and this is incredibly important here because I have a theory about this. I don't know if it's actually happened yet, but I have a theory about this. The response of Alfred is, if I can't get you to stay here, then I want to fight alongside all of you, right? I want to fight alongside you guys in defeating these undead gods. They've taken so much from me, and I don't want to sit on the sidelines and basically do nothing. And the response of Damian is, you really want to fight against these guys? And the response of Alfred is, yes, you have to find a way. A weapon, a power, a ring, whatever it is, I want to fight. I don't want to sit uselessly on the sidelines. Now, of course, this leads to Damian and Jonathan taking their leave and ultimately going, but it's really not without Damian saying, like, you say that there's so much of my father in me. I say there's a lot of my father in you, because he would say the same thing, right? If he were in your position, he would say, like, I don't want to sit on the sidelines. If for whatever reason Bruce Wayne was incapable of operating as Batman, say he was wheelchair bound or something like that, and didn't have a suit that could compensate by giving him the ability to move, then he would simply say, like, I want to do something. I want to be able to fight in some capacity. Or maybe Batman's like 90 years old, like he is in Batman Beyond, right? He's like 1,000,000 years old and just grizzled and just this crotchety old son of a gun in the Batcave. But still, you know, it's one of those things, because my theory here is that Alfred is going to become a Green Lantern. I don't know if that's going to happen, but I think Alfred's going to be a Green Lantern. And the reason why I say that is, if you guys remember Tom Taylor's Injustice, Alfred took a pill that gave him the powers of Superman and beat the crap out of Superman and rescued Batman from almost being killed by Superman, and then took Batman out of the Batcave and just left Superman there. But Tom Taylor has a way of always like giving Alfred some kind of power, right? Giving Alfred some kind of an ability. At this point, we switch over to Almerac. Now, I'm going to be honest with you guys, man. We're basically shown Maxima, right? Now, here's the thing. Anybody who's been reading DC Comics for any measure of time probably had the same response that I did, where you're like, Maxima? She hasn't been relevant since like the days when Superman died, which is true. So the idea behind Maxima, and it's one of the most crazy things, the idea behind Maxima is that DC was tired of the idea of like Batman, I almost said Batman and Superman. They were tired of the idea of like, of Superman and Lois Lane. And so the idea of Maxima is that her and Superman were genetically compatible. And so what that meant is that she could give Superman like the perfect kids, right? Superman didn't want to marry her and didn't want to have any kids with her, so he ultimately rejected her. But it was an attempt by DC Comics to create a new love interest for Superman. But the thing about this is that she hasn't been relevant since. She appeared in a couple different comics here and there, but like literally no one cared, right? It's just kind of like, oh, cool, Maxima, whatever, man, and just keep turning the page. So it is interesting to see her here, but much like her complete and total level of irrelevance in DC Comics, she's also irrelevant here because her planet is attacked by Darkseid and the Undead Armada, and they're all conquered, and that's the story of her. So of course, what we end up doing here is jumping back to Oa and like the coming together of all the Guardians of the universe, as well as all the superheroes who are here. Now everybody, like all the superpowered survivors or any able-bodied person who can fight, this is numbered potentially in the billions, right? Just this massive crowd being addressed by the Guardians. And what they say is that the Undead Armada has already taken 12 planets, right? These 12 planets have been seized, completely and totally razed, and their occupants or their races converted into members of the undead. And it's just spreading like a plague, right? Their numbers are growing at an exponential rate. One person bites 2, those 2 bite 4, those 4 bite 8, those 8 bite 16. You understand what I'm saying? Like it's just moving, and it's just moving so fast and spreading across the universe so quickly that the response of the Guardians is there's only one thing we can do here, right? Like another 7 planets with species clearly seen as assets by the anti-life equation have been infected. So now we're at 19, and he says we are sanctioning lethal force. These infected worlds have to be wiped away. Now, this is an important distinction because traditionally the Green Lanterns are a peacekeeping force. One of the rules that was laid down when it came to the Guardians of the Universe is the Green Lanterns could not take lives. In more recent years in DC Comics, that changed during Jeff Johns' run on Green Lantern with the Sinestro Corps War. It was one of the massive moments of the conflict because like the Sinestro Corps, the Yellow Lanterns, are just like wiping out Green Lanterns everywhere they find them because Sinestro knows like the Green Lanterns can't harm anybody in that way. They can't end a life. And so literally in the middle of this battle, the Guardians are like, we have no choice. And all these Green Lantern rings start lighting up with the statement, lethal force is now sanctioned. And like the tide turns like that. Like it's nuts. The Green Lanterns are like, it's on like Donkey Kong, and they start taking it to the Sinestro Corps. God, that story is so good. It was so phenomenal. But the thing about this is that in response to this, of course, Superman, who's now cured of the anti-life virus, and his son Jonathan do exactly what you would expect them to, which is say, we can't wipe out these worlds. We have a cure. We should be focusing on how to cure these people in terms of wiping these people out. Now, there are moral arguments on both sides and reasonable arguments on both sides. The stance of Superman and Jonathan is the preservation of life, helping people as opposed to ending people. But Brainiac and these guys who are survivors and have allied themselves against the anti-life virus, their response is the possible risk of going to the anti-life armada and trying to inject people with a cure. The risk is too great because all that would have to happen is Jonathan Kent or Superman or some other being out there with incredible levels of power or Brainiac with his incredible intellect. All will happen is they're turned and it's game over, right? Like the dominoes fall and it's the end of everything. The risk is too great. The only thing that we can really do in order to bring this thing to an end is to eradicate everybody there. So there's reasonable arguments on both sides, right? Sometimes the risk of the cure is worse than the disease, so you just wipe out the disease, which also includes wiping people out. So it's one of those weird situations where you can kind of create arguments on both sides. But of course, what ends up happening is Superman responds kind of uncharacteristically by lashing out and in fact attacking Ganthet, right? Just like punching this guy, right? Just like knocking this guy out. Because literally Ganthet is just like, if you stand against us and everybody else who's joined you, we will destroy you. Like we'll lock you up in a prison, that'll be the end of it, and we will go and take out these worlds. And so Superman attacking Ganthet is not something that you normally see. And so it's kind of weird because while all this is happening, we end up finding out Ares is basically watching all of this unfold. And what's so interesting about this is that it's actually Damian Wayne who picks up on what's happening. He's looking around at this whole situation and how quickly everybody went crazy and all started attacking each other, and his response is something's wrong, right? Like I can feel it. My pulse is elevated, my judgment's clouded, my emotional response is heightened. We are not in control of this situation. And that's when he sees Ares and realizes Ares is kind of goading them all into fighting each other because Ares is the god of war and and is just kind of into that cool stuff. Now, of course, literally Damien says, like, you're manipulating us, God of War, and the response of Ares is, I just gave you all a little nudge. Damien says, stop this, and then a voice comes out of nowhere and says, you should listen to that little man, Ares. This voice is coming from Mr. Mxyzptlk. He says, I won't let you hurt Superman. The fifth dimensional imp with the power of a god is here. Mr. Mxyzptlk, this guy can alter reality on a whim. So the real question you have to ask here is, what would happen in DCeased if Mr. Mxyzptlk is converted to an undead god? What would happen there? Because all he has to do is alter reality, and it's the end of everything. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.